Welcome to a brand new episode of Extreme Reloading. And today we're starting a new series. And I'm calling this Project 124. What we're doing is we're returning to the 9mm Luger. And this time, our extreme bullet is a suite of 124 grain jacketed hollow point bullets. Now, it may not seem like that's too extreme, but here's the challenge. I'm going to be using 3 different bullets, but I want to set it up in such a way that I can use, if possible, use the same bullet seating settings and the same powder charge. And hopefully, all 3 of those bullets will perform just as well as one versus the other. The 3 bullets that I'll be using is, first of all, the Hornady XTP. And if you've been watching some of our past episodes this season, you know that I do like the Hornady XTP hollow point. Secondly, I'm going to be using the Speer Gold Dot. Now, this is a legendary bullet that is oftentimes pretty hard to get a hold of. I got a hold of some ordered through Midway USA, and I have these 124 grain bullets to test as well. Lastly, kind of a newcomer on the block, I have Sierra's V-Crown bullet. Now, this is an exciting bullet. This is the exact same bullet that is loaded in Sig Sauer's Elite ammo. Those V-Crown bullets are actually made by Sierra, and they're offered, some of those are offered for reloaders such as myself. Now, it may not seem like there's much of a challenge with 3 different name brands of 124 grain bullets. Obviously, they're all 124 grain bullets. They're all made for the 9mm. What's the big deal? Well, when we look at these bullets, we'll start noticing some nuances, some differences between one bullet and another. Yes, they're all 124 grain bullets. They're all jacketed hollow points. But the profile or the shape of these bullets is different, one versus another. And the length of the bullet is different. Different by about 1/100th of an inch. The XTP is the longest of the bunch, coming in at 0.570 of an inch. And then the Speer Gold Dot and Sierra V-Crown are pretty darn similar, the V-Crown being just slightly shorter than the Gold Dot and obviously the shortest of the bunch. Now, the way that that affects your rounds is that it will have varying case intrusion. In other words, this XTP is going to intrude into the case more than the other 2 bullets when we have the same combined overall length of the cartridge, which in turn is going to give this a slightly different pressure curve. In other words, this bullet will achieve higher pressures faster than the other 2. Now, whenever you start loading for a new bullet that you haven't loaded for before, or a new cartridge you haven't loaded for before, you've got to do some research. Spend a little bit of time reading the reloading manuals. Certainly go online, look at the manufacturer's website. Some of those manufacturers do list recipes or load data for their given bullets. Others don't. Also, don't forget to look at the load data available from the different powder manufacturers. Once again, I am going to be using unique powder, and so I'm specifically looking for loads for these bullets that use unique powder. Now, be very careful when you're looking at some stuff on the web that may be just someone's blog post or whatever. If it's very different than what you're seeing somewhere else, you probably want to avoid that and not use it, at least not use it as a starting point. And also pay very close attention to what is your minimum or starting charge, and start with that starting or beginning charge and then work your way up. For pistol rounds, I increase my powder charges in 0.2 of a grain increments. You typically don't go more than a grain at the most anyway, across the whole spectrum of it or the whole range of loads. And increasing by 0.2 of a grain works out really well. Now, while I was doing my research, I noticed that the load data, the powder charges, varied wildly from the Lyman manual to the unique Alliant powders web page to this versus that, and so on and so forth. But when you look at it closely, many of these are calling for a fairly different combined overall length, and you can't skip that little bit of data, because pressure is built up, yes, by the powder charge relative to the mass or weight of that bullet, but also by the combined overall length and how much that bullet is intruding into the case. So in effect, the shorter the combined overall length, the higher your pressure charges are going to be. Now, since my longest bullet is the Hornady XTP, it's going to become my common denominator, or lowest common denominator. So I'm going to begin my charge at 4.0 grains of unique powder. I'm going to use a combined overall length of 1.06 is the recommended minimum combined overall length. And I've got my bullet dies set right now for 1.08 inch combined overall length. Alliant, or unique, is telling us to use a 1.12 inch combined overall length, and that's quite a bit different. So I was talking to the Hornady technicians, and my suspicion was that the profile of this, or shape of this XTP bullet, is the reason why they're calling for a shorter combined overall length. And indeed, that is the case. That they affirmed that or confirmed that for me. And if you notice that shape, it's kind of straight-walled for the longest time and then makes an abrupt angle into that hollow point nose of the bullet. And because of the shape of that bullet, Hornady was a little bit concerned that if it seated too far out, in other words, too long of a COL, that it might actually impact the rifling on some of these individual pistols. Now, after I worked up my dummy round, I took that dummy round and did the old plunk test into some of my barrels. In fact, both the FN and the Beretta that are going to be used for this test, and the plunk test worked wonderfully. No impact on the rifling at all. So the 1.08, in fact, I probably could have gone a little bit longer, but anyway, the 1.08 inch works just fine. I'm going to try to use that exact same bullet seating depth to load both the V-Crown bullet and the Speer Gold Dot, and I'm excited to see how this all works. Now, once again, whenever we're working up a new load, job one is safety. We got to have a very safe round to be firing through these guns. Then, working within those safety margins, we want to craft, or I want to craft, a bullet that is, first of all, or a round that, first of all, is very accurate, functions reliably, cycles reliably in these guns. And then another goal that I have for these 124 grain bullets is I still want them to achieve supersonic velocities. Now, with the 115 grain bullet, just 9 grains lighter than the 124, supersonic velocities were simple to achieve. But with the 124, some of the load data looks like it may be really difficult to hit that 1100 feet per second supersonic velocity. Now, why do I want supersonic velocity? Well, if you remember in some of our past videos, I compared the 9mm Luger to the 45 ACP. And I said something like, the 9mm Luger is effective because it hits like a bolt of lightning. And it gets its effect by having a very fast bullet. And that effect is not just fast, it's faster than the speed of sound, supersonic. And what happens inside of a target is a phenomenon called transient cavitation. It's this ballooning effect caused by that supersonic projectile entering the target. The 45 ACP with a 230 grain bullet never achieves supersonic velocity, but it, if you recall my little saying, it hits like a ton of bricks. It's the sheer mass of that bullet that really makes it an effective round. So if now we have a 124 grain bullet that relative to a 230 grain 45 ACP bullet, if that 124 is no longer supersonic, then it has lost its effectiveness relative to the 45 ACP. And if they're both running at subsonic velocities, then certainly the more effective bullet is going to be the 45 ACP because it has more mass. But it's not going to be impossible to achieve supersonic velocities with these bullets. It may be just a little bit difficult. In fact, one of these bullets may achieve it while another one won't. And I think we're not going to get much above 1,100 feet per second by the time we reach the maximum charge for these rounds. So I've got 15 cases ready to go. These are CCI Blazer brass. And I'm going to be using the CCI small pistol primers for these. Unique powder starting at 4.0 grains, working up in 0.2 of a grain increments, and then topping all of those off with the Hornady XTP. If I can achieve safe rounds all the way through my final charge, then I'm confident I could replace that bullet with either the V-Crown or the Gold Dot bullets. So I'm going to get busy loading these things up, and then we're going to head out to the range and shoot this load work up. Okay, I'm going to put the first 4 rounds at the bullseye in the upper left. Then I'm going to shoot a Z pattern across that with my 5th group. Going hot. Oh, that's good. 1081, or no, 1018. Wow, I was worried about it not even hitting 900, you know? Because if I didn't hit 900 on my first shot, the likelihood that I'd get supersonic by the last shot was almost impossible. I needed to hit 900. I made 1,000. Let's see if that's a anomaly or if it's the real deal. 1010. Hey, pretty consistent actually. So this is 4.4 grains. Nice. 1080. That's a big jump. Target in the upper right. We made supersonic already. It's 1108, so that's cool. Let's see if we can keep her going. 1101, pretty good. And 1104, wow, that's cool. Center bullseye. Alrighty. Good, okay. 1149. 1130. Relatively decent. I mean, not bad. I'm going to do 5 grains. Getting close to the max. $11.82. $11.66. $11.78. 5.0 grains is good. Now 5.2. $11.73. $12.02. The last round. $12.22. Getting faster. All right, we're good. Excellent. Supersonic. All right, I'd like to do a little recap and wrap this up. As I noted earlier, safety is job one. And all 15 rounds fired absolutely safely, but I will note that one round was showing a slightly flattened primer. And that was under the 5.2 or maximum charge that I was using today. Now, my son was off camera picking up the brass as it was ejecting and taking a look at each one and then informingly go or no go, better check this, whatever. So that's very important to do, even though you didn't really see that sort of stuff on camera. So, one slightly flattened primer at the 5.2 grain charge. Next, let's talk about the goals that I had for this particular loading. One of my goals, of course, was to see very smooth performance or functioning in that pistol that I was using. And you saw every single round chambered very, very nicely. No problems at all. Fired, cycled beautifully right on through. So that's a big thumbs up. Things went well that way. Before we headed out to the range, I was talking about my concern that we might not hit supersonic velocities. Well, now it's kind of silly. It's surprise, surprise, right? We hit supersonic super easily. In fact, those loads were achieving velocities slightly, fairly higher than what the reloading manuals were suggesting. And at the same time, we were not getting any pressure problems. Next, let's look at consistency. And here I want to rely upon the lab radar chronograph. Now, there are really no statistics for the first 3 rounds that I fired. They were individual rounds loaded at different charges. Then I had, as you noted, 3-shot groups all the way through my 15th round. And so one of the things that I like to look at is the similarity between mean or average and median. This tells us something about how these rounds followed a normal or bell-shaped curve or not, bearing in mind that we only did 3 rounds at each loading. I also like to look at the standard deviations, the variation of those velocities about the mean. Here again, the 5.2 grain charge didn't look so hot. It didn't look so nice. It kind of fell apart. We're starting to see dispersion from the mean, and that's probably an indicator of some pressures starting to spike. Let's say one of those rounds that flew the fastest had quite a bit, maybe, more pressure than the others. Maybe another one not quite so much. Why would they be different? Well, of course, there's different case capacities, just slightly different case capacities, slightly different burn rates, and slightly different consistencies of those powders, etc., etc. We're starting to see that stuff happen, so that tells me I think I better back off from the 5.2, and the 5.0 grain charge was actually very consistent on its muzzle velocities. Now, none of these loads actually shot really nicely on the target. It wasn't a real big concern of mine. I really wasn't trying my darndest to get perfect bullseye shots each time. I was much more concerned with the velocities and the cycling and watching for pressure signs. So that may be some of my doing, but there is still concern that I'm having that maybe this 124 grain bullet, in this case the XTP, maybe that FNX pistol really doesn't like it. We will find out. In fact, that's what we're going to be doing next time. I'm going to be loading up a bunch of these Hornady XTPs, 124 grain bullets, as well as a bunch of these Speer Gold Dots, and a bunch of these Sierra V-Crowns. As I said earlier, I'm going to be using the same combined overall length, the same setting on my bullet seating die, and I'm going to be using 5.0 grains precisely of unique powder. Join me next time when we're going to be shooting all of these rounds for group in both the FNX and Beretta 92 M9 pistol.